Hello and welcome to today's Royal Roundup. We've seen lots of the senior royals making moves this week. We've seen them today, actually, and Daily Express's royal correspondent Richard Palmer was also at an event with the Queen, Camilla, last night. So we'll be hearing all of the exclusives there and what to expect at the end of the month when they go to Kenya, the King and Queen. We'll be talking about all of that, as well as Harry and Meghan having a visit to New York this week. We'll briefly touch on that. And of course, it's Princess Eugenie's 5th wedding anniversary. So what has changed since that date? And will we be seeing more of Princess Eugenie, or is it just today in particular that we're going to be speaking about her? Lots to talk about on the Royal Roundup today. But first off, let's kick off with Kate and William's mission. Richard, what is this all about?
Hi. Well, they've been doing a series of events this week to do with mental health. You know, it's a subject they keep coming back to, obviously, that they campaigned on. And they're actually out at the moment. As you can tell, I'm not there at Bishop Abbey. Another royal correspondent is doing the rota.
Do you not have a body double, Richard? I thought you'd have.
No. And there are some really fun images coming out of them playing netball, trying to score points with some factors against them. You know, the point of it this morning has been to illustrate how young athletes are being coached to have a bit of mental toughness about them and to face up against, you know, a tough crowd, or if they're working against the clock. So that's produced some fun images. I think they're just about to start playing, if they haven't just started playing a Paralympic sport for visually impaired people. So I think we should expect to see some images in tomorrow's papers of that event. But yeah, what's been interesting for me is that these events, Tuesday to Thursday, have all been around World Mental Health Day on the 10th, really. And Kate made what I thought was a keynote speech, which was really signposting that they're trying to move things on the mental health front. And William also talked about wanting to see concrete action. And, we know that there is a crisis facing young people in Britain and in other countries with, large numbers of people in their teens and 20s suffering anxiety and depression, etc., and on medication. And so she was sort of saying, what are we hoping to achieve? And I was really struck by her speech, because I think it set out a wider mission statement, really, for what. And people, I think, often ask, what's the royal family for? What do they do apart from just sort of providing us with a bit of light entertainment from time to time? And I think her words really illustrated what she and William are about. And she said, what are we trying to improve by focusing our efforts on mental health? She said, ultimately, we are working to build a happier, healthier world. We want to shape fairer, safer, kinder, more equal societies that seek the common good and a better future together. For just as we need to restore, protect and invest in our planet, so we must also restore, protect and invest in the communities, relationships, people living on it. We believe that starts with you, our young people, but it also means all of us, because when you think about it, we can each shape the world in which we live.
And how much of that speech, Richard, would she have actually written?
She would have been helped by a private secretary, but I think she's speaking from the heart there about what lies at the heart of their agenda. And it's, in some ways, it's a political agenda, you might say. And yet this is a couple that has no political power. They are beholden to the British government, really. They have to be very careful about what they say, and they can't stray into party political areas of contention. But they can speak about these things, because I think there is, fun enough, there is consensus on it that most politicians think that creating a fairer, more equal society is a good thing. It's just how you go about doing that, and that's where you get the divide.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, there obviously is maybe a slight political slant on this because they know that they're going to have to appeal to a younger generation with the royal family moving forward.
Yes.
They also do have children who are going to be growing up in particularly difficult times for everybody. Obviously, they're very privileged, but do you think they have the opinion swayed on this because of their young children and that they are concerned?
Well, I just think it's. I mean, you mentioned their privilege, and I think that's an important point to make. And I think it's one I've made on here before, where there is a slight disconnect between a couple who sit at the pinnacle of our entire class system, for want of a better phrase. They are the elite of the elite. They send their children, will be sending their children to the most elitist schools. Probably they use private medical facilities, and yet they're talking about wanting to create a more equal world. And I've asked them about this before, or their senior advisors, and they said that they just want to use their position to argue for that. And I think it's a delicate line, because they are clear sometimes in background briefings from their people that they do want to influence government ministers and other policymakers, but again, they just have to be very careful about what they say and try to ensure that how they would normally phrase it is that they are trying to create a national debate that then, in a way, encourages other people to put pressure on the politicians to change things for the better.
Do you think perhaps they've got, are they in reality, in the sense that they know that the message isn't going to be put across to everybody, not everybody is going to listen to them? Or are they slightly, I mean, this is quite a harsh word, but delusional about the fact that they think everyone's going to listen to them? Or are they fully aware that not everybody is?
No, well, I'm sure they are. And certainly some of the research that's come back on, for example, Princess of Wales's work on early years has shown that there is, a lot of people still aren't listening and aren't aware, really don't really understand the issues she's trying to raise about how important those first 5 years are in a child's life, and how we have to change things for the better for everybody. A lot of it does sound quite sort of airy-fairy. I realise that as well, and I think that's a function of their difficulty in sometimes speaking about the nitty-gritty of what needs to change in practice. But
they've been open about their mental health. William has in the past, and Kate's obviously a champion for this, especially, as you said, with all her work with early careers.
Yeah.
But been open about her own mental health.
She's not perhaps been as open as some. Let me just tilt my camera down a little bit. Hope that's a bit better. She's perhaps not been as open as Harry has been, for example. I think it's become apparent that her brother's struggles with his mental health at times were certainly a key factor in her wanting to raise this as an issue. It was her idea in 2016 to start talking about the mental health crisis that was affecting young people in the UK. But actually, you mentioned William, and I think I ought to mention that there was quite an interesting point he made yesterday, which I think rather got lost in. There was so much royal coverage yesterday.
Yeah.
But he was talking about. He's talked before about how he was how he was affected by his work as an air ambulance pilot and coming across people in such dreadful situations, with death and destruction, whatever. But it was quite interesting what he was talking about yesterday, which was when he left the service, that left a huge gap, and that he was talking about people needing help to cope when they retire from jobs, or when they leave jobs and go to something else, when they face those sorts of pressures. So I thought that was quite interesting. He was talking about his own personal experiences there.
Yeah, and they must realise when they bring in their own personal experiences that it's more likely that people will listen to their message.
Yes, I mean, Kate's been speaking this morning to some of the athletes about instilling helping her children have the right attitude towards sort of achieving goals, and not to be too focused on an end goal all the time, and to praise progress wherever it happens. And so when there's always going to be more interest if she's talking about her own children, I think.
Yeah, and they obviously know how the media works to a certain extent now, so they know what's going to grab the headlines. Okay, well, let's move to the top of the family then. The King and the Queen are preparing for Kenya. We briefly spoke about this before we went live, Richard, about the ties that they have to Kenya over the years with the royal family. I think we've got a picture of them in the past there. Charles looks very young, I have to say. So how many years has it been since he was there, Richard?
Oh, now you've got
Matthew. Oh no!
I think he was there in 1971. Queen Elizabeth II was, I think, last year in 1983, if I remember rightly.
So it's been quite a while. So what can we expect from this? Because whenever they do royal tours, there is a lot of pressure for it to be only positive feedback coming back to the UK, as they obviously want to shine a light with their relationship with them. But sometimes in the past, some of the royal tours have been quite controversial about what has been coming back to headlines in the UK. So, Richard, tell us what.
Yes. Well, I mean, I think if you spoke to the Foreign Office or the palace, you would certainly hear that everybody wants to focus on how great Britain's trading relationship and other relationships are with Kenya now, and how they want to grow those relationships. I think Britain is already the biggest investor in Kenya, but there's also an acknowledgement that there will be some focus on the past. I mean, I think it's surprised quite a few people that Kenya is going to be their first Commonwealth overseas visit since the change of reign. I think many people, including me, I have to say, expected Australia, Canada, New Zealand to be among the first places that they visited, and that doesn't look like that's going to happen this year.
And do you think perhaps it's not Australia because of the debate which is happening there right now about the royal family, and they don't want more coverage of that coming to light, so they're just thinking, oh well, we're not going to go there then whilst that's happening?
Well, I think the palace would deny that, say that doesn't really. That isn't uppermost in their thinking at all. It's about UK government priorities, really, and obviously as well, it's about the priorities of the Australian, Canadian, New Zealand governments as well. But essentially, the royals go where the government tells them to go.
So how much personal sway do they get in that, Richard? If they were.
There's a bit of backwards and forwards because there's a foreign visits committee which comprises senior Foreign Office officials and the private secretaries from the palace, among other people. And there is a bit of backwards and forwards to it. I've certainly picked up before the idea that the King, when he was Prince Charles, was particularly pushing to go to certain places, and he was very happy when the Foreign Office agreed. But certainly formally the position is that they go at the request of the British government. And Kenya, it's celebrating its 60th anniversary of independence from Britain this year. So that's the obvious peg for them to go there. But also, there's been this controversy for years and years over the way that the British colonial authorities dealt with the uprising in Kenya in the 50s and early 60s, during the emergency. And I think part of I know that part of the reason for going is to put a seal on all of that, and to say, we acknowledge that there were things done that shouldn't have been done by the British colonial authorities.
Yeah,
in that period, and we want to move on now.
The king is happier by what it sounds like to talk about these more controversial topics than that of his late mother. But does he still find it awkward, Richard? Because I can imagine it isn't natural to him to be talking about these things after so many years of, I guess, learning from his mother and seeing how she did things.
Well, yeah, I think it's it's always a delicate balancing act, and it's a diplomatic skill to get it right. And what we've seen with his comments and William's comments about slavery, for example, part of the sort of British Empire's legacy, is that they've been very careful not to go far enough to satisfy some people, as much as they'd like to have done, to made everybody happy. The king has he's not exactly said sorry, but he's expressed regret, and about slavery being a stain, and I expect something similar here. I mean, as it happens, Britain, so more than 5,000 people who suffered at the hands of the British in the emergency in Kenya took legal action against the British government, and there was a settlement which involved the UK government paying about £19 million out in compensation, and issuing a statement of regret about the way things were handled in those days. So, I doubt whether the king will go much further than that, but I would imagine that there will be some expression of regret on his part on behalf.
And of course, you don't expect anything from the Queen on this, I'm guessing.
No, I mean, I think she'll be there with him, but it'll be the king that will do the talking.
Okay. And in terms of how long they spend there, Richard?
So it's been announced now. It's effectively a 4-day state visit from October the 31st to November the 3rd. And of course, the other aspect of it is so the other poignant thing about this visit is they are going to the Commonwealth country where Elizabeth II was when she found out her father had died, and that she And so there will be an element of this trip which will pay tribute to the late Queen. And
do you think he very much sort of follows in her footsteps and tries to do the things that she was doing, like spending time in Scotland where she was, so fond of, and he seems to have done that now too? Is there part of him that enjoys and perhaps takes pleasure and comfort from doing that?
Yeah, I think there's been, it's been a mix. There's been, we talked before about the emphasis in the new reign on things that perhaps Queen Elizabeth II didn't quite stress as much. But at the same time, there's almost a reflex action, which is, what would the late Queen have done at this point, and what would she have done in this situation? And so, yes, the King and Queen have been up in Scotland for a long time. I mean, it was interrupted by their state visit to France, but they went back up to Scotland, and they've only just come back down. I mean, the King was at Buckingham Palace yesterday. I mean, he made, he made calls to the President of Israel and the King of Jordan as part of a sort of diplomatic effort to try to, I suppose, build some sort of movement for to try to avoid a wider conflagration in the Middle East after the dreadful events we've seen there in the last few days in Israel and now in the Gaza Strip. And one of the things that was interesting was that the King and Prince William and Kate, through their spokesmen, described what happened in Israel last Saturday and in the hours and days afterwards as terrorism. And there's been a lot of controversy because the BBC hasn't been describing it as terrorism. But about in the paper this morning is that in doing that, they're acting on government advice, reflecting the UK government's approach to this. So I think that's going to be a theme over the next few days and weeks. I think I would imagine that there will be further discussions with key players in the Middle East, in the hope that the UK can use the soft power of the royal family to try to get a message across, to get people to step back from the brink, and at the same time, I think in the UK, the King will be building on the work that he's already done in the first year of his reign to try to promote understanding and tolerance between people of different faiths and communities.
And will that soft power and will those conversations that he is having over in the UK have any kind of impact, do you think, Richard, over there, really?
It's so hard to say. I do think that people listen, and people perhaps some politicians abroad. There is scope for getting the UK's message across from the royal family that they're in some cases more likely to listen to the King or another senior member of the family than a politician. But it's such a, let's not get into the details of what's been going on there, but it's such a terrible situation and such a sensitive issue. It's very hard to know how war can be avoided now, because we've seen.
But one thing it does show is that the royal family are aware of news which is happening around the world.
Well, they are, and this is, when I first started doing this job, one of my predecessors, Robert Jobson, said that being a royal correspondent is sort of a cross between being a showbiz correspondent and being a political correspondent. And I think, in media terms, royal coverage is often a bit of light relief from the doom and gloom going on elsewhere. But you shouldn't forget that. And, quite often, particularly in the States, I see that royal stories are covered by entertainment correspondents.
Yes, yeah.
What they do is not really entertainment. It's as I say, it's a mix of diplomacy.
This light relief a lot of the time, actually, underneath everything that they're doing to get that front page picture and that front page story is usually highlighting quite serious issues.
Exactly. There's usually a serious issue underneath it all.
Yeah. Okay, then. Well, let's move on to the last few minutes of the show then. 5 years ago today, Richard, I remember it being shown on ITV, was Princess Eugenie's wedding. And I think we had it covered on the BBC for the other weddings, that of Catherine and William. Catherine and William? Yeah, Catherine and William. God, sorry, I was going mad then. And Harry and Meghan. But Princess Eugenie was shown on ITV that day. And that kind of shows it from my perspective of the fact that, she's not a senior working royal. But if you were to look on Daily Express's website today and other websites, if you so wished or wanted, it is all over their websites today. So what is Princess Eugenie up to? will we be seeing more of her? And what's happened to the less senior working roles in the family? Because before the king was king, Richard, we did speak about it in various episodes coming up to the Royal Roundup of when he's king, it will be a slimmed down monarchy, and there'll be less senior working royals. So it does sort of seem to be the case, because I've not really heard a lot about her since this day.
No. Well, I mean, first thing to say is that Beatrice and Eugenie aren't working royals, in the sense that they don't undertake official engagements on behalf of the monarch. They don't receive taxpayers' money to support their work. They're private, in that sense, they're private individuals. They just happen to be related to the king, but they use their status as members of the royal family to promote charities and other causes. I mean, I did a story last week, for example, about Beatrice. I very rarely do stories about either of them, I have to say. I think it's different, on the website. I mean, I think there is a constituency of people around the world who are really interested in royal families, European royal families, Jordanian royal family, others, and there is enough of that group to make it worthwhile to cover those people online. But in paper, which is still, I mean, I've worked for both digital and print, but in the paper, I think it's much more focused on, what do the particular people who buy the paper, what are they interested in? And for them, I think Beatrice and Eugenie are sort of very minor characters. So, you will hear different interpretations of why they're not representing the monarchy. From their point of view, when they were at university and just starting to come out of university, people speaking on their behalf, and they themselves, actually. I mean, I was at an event with Sarah, Duchess of York, where she brought her daughters along, and they said they didn't want a life of ribbon cutting, as they put it, and they wanted to have their own careers. So I've taken that at face value. I think they're doing what they wanted to do, rather than that they've been pushed out. And so they get on with. I mean, Eugenie, I think, is spending time in Portugal, as I understood it, with Jack. He's got some, work in Portugal, and spending some time in. They've still got an apartment at Kensington Palace. I mean, I've seen it reported that they've been using Frogmore Cottage since vacated by Harry and Meghan, but I don't believe that's the case. I can't. I have to confess, I'm not 100% sure. I've tried to check it, but the palace's view is these are private matters, and
of course.
I don't believe that they are there.
But of course, once upon a time, public money was spent, refurbishing Frogmore Cottage. So I mean, in some way, you'd think that was enough ground to ask the question.
There's definitely a public interest in wanting to know what is happening to Frogmore Cottage.
Yeah.
We all asked at the financial briefing at the Palace in the summer, and essentially we've been told, well, nothing at the moment, but we'll update you next year. So we'll have to wait and see on that.
It's leaving the door open to Harry and Meghan potentially coming back at some point. Is it anything to do with that, Richard? Or again, no idea?
I don't think so. I mean, we can talk about them briefly in a minute. But I was just going to say, Beatrice, I thought it was a really interesting story about dyslexia last week. She spoke about her experience of growing up with dyslexia, and she also called for better training for teachers to be able to recognise the signs and to be able to help young people with dyslexia.
I mean, I'm a fellow dyslexic and dyspraxic, And in order to get, diagnosed, I had to have an educational psychologist, and I was lucky in the sense that, my parents could fund that. But a lot of parents wouldn't be able to, wouldn't be in the position. Yes, there are some grants in place, but some schools don't have that grant to be able to do so. And in order to get diagnosed, you do need an educational psychologist to have a look. That is good. But in terms of her relationships with senior working royals, I'm guessing that's a personal matter as well. It's not like they've been shunned from the family like that.
No, I think they get on quite well with their Uncle Charles. I think they were up at Balmoral with the family gathering in the summer, I mean, there are obviously still tensions with their father. There's been a lot of speculation about whether Prince Andrew will stay at Royal Lodge. And from my understanding, there's not really been a change in that situation. That he's very keen to stay. He thinks he can afford to stay. The king, as I understand it, remains worried that his brother won't be able to afford to stay there. But at the end of the day, it's up to Andrew, and it's not up to the king. And Andrew has a 75-year lease with the Crown Estate, which is completely independent of the king, although he's nominally in charge of the Crown Estate. He really doesn't have any role at all in it. As things stand, Andrew is staying there.
Okay. Well, we'll just have to see on that front, won't we? See what happens there. I'm guessing nothing will happen until the new year anyway, because before we know it, it'll be Christmas, Richard. Which brings me on to Harry and Meghan. They've been spotted in New York this week. I say spotted as if they'd sort of been packed or something, but no, this was very much an event which was publicised. We'll briefly touch on them because there's always the question going round. And as with Christmas coming up, their question will be asked, will they be coming to the UK for Christmas? Will anybody be going over there? And of course, they're quite close to Princess Eugenie, so perhaps Princess Eugenie will be visiting them. I thought it'd be a good one to end on. What's the plan now, Richard? What can we tell from this new look? When they came out on stage, they were sort of holding hands together, very much a united front, putting all those rumours about, marriage problems aside, very much looking together. Of course, there'll be body language experts who might say different, as we well both know, Richard. But of course, that's all speculation. So is this a new PR drive? What do you think it is, Richard?
Well, I think they are having to reinvent themselves again because clearly Spotify has gone, and I'm not sure how much work they're going to be doing in Netflix, but I think there's still a relationship with Netflix, isn't there? But they need to. Yeah, they need to. They do seem to need to promote themselves, and so there was plenty of press coverage in New York, and as you say, it wasn't that they were. I mean, they were encouraging press coverage of the event. In fact, we covered it in the Daily Express. We don't always cover their events. I didn't do it personally. I think it was somebody else. It might have been one of our New York, somebody in our New York office. I'm not sure, but of course it was noticeable that it was World Mental Health Day, and on one side of the Atlantic you've got William and Kate doing these events. On the other side of the Atlantic you've got Harry and Meghan doing World Mental Health Days, but not actually speaking to one another, and still, as I understand it, as estranged as ever. I did check. I spoke to somebody a few days ago because you keep I keep seeing online reports that something's happening, that there's been some rapprochement between them or whatever, but I don't believe that's the case at all. I mean, I just think that I think their friends and family, some of the family, hope that there can be reconciliation in the future. But it's about time, I think. Time is the great healer, and the emotions are still too raw at the moment for there to be any possibility, as I understand it, of any sort of reconciliation, certainly between the brothers and their wives at the moment. I must confess I haven't asked lately about the king and his younger son, but I don't get the impression that there's much going on there either. And obviously we saw that Harry and Meghan came over to Germany for the Invictus Games, and Harry was in the UK, but there was no royal meeting as far as I'm aware.
Is there any event coming up soon which would bring them together?
Well, no. I mean, if there was, Christmas is the obvious thing. If there was some hope of them fixing things, then Christmas sounding would be the obvious time, but it's probably a little bit early for anybody to be making decisions about that, and it's probably even too early for us in the media to be speculating about it. But
yeah, I'm sure that story will be coming around.
Yes.
Okay, then. Well, that's the latest from the other side of the world, and as you said. Ironic, they were both covering World Mental Health Day.
Yeah, just to say, I still hope that I find it very difficult that the attitude they've taken towards some sections of the UK press, but I still hope that bridges can be built there as well, and I think there have been signs. That the people advising the Duke and Duchess of Sussex can see the advantage of dealing with all parts of the UK press up to a point, and I don't think there is. I think there might be a meeting of minds in some ways about some of the things that they've been saying over the last few years, not on everything. And I'd still hope that there might be a future where can work again with them, but
I guess
somewhere in that.
Yeah, only time will tell on that front. But yeah, as you said, that it's still raw. Lots of what has happened, especially for the family. So maybe it'll just take a bit more time.
Yeah. But and for us as a paper as well, there's also the issue of covering them online gets quite a lot of engagement because people have very strong views, either pro or against them. But in print, I see letters in the paper from readers saying, I'm just so fed up with you covering them. I don't want to read about them.
Yeah.
And it's above my pay grade. That's an issue for the editor about getting the balance right there and how much coverage you give them.
And of course we have to listen to the readers and what they want. So there is also that argument there too. And because they're not working senior royals, how many pages do you give to that? It's a ever going cycle. But there we are, and that will round up today's Royal Roundup. And I'm sure we'll be back next week with more stories to discuss. Richard, thank you as ever for your insights.
Good speak.